Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's Daybreak on Trust Television. We now move straight to our first conversation this morning. So much has happened this morning. If you have missed any, you don't want to miss this part of the conversation. Since Nigeria's return to democracy in 1999, one key trend has been women's underrepresentation in politics. Historically, Nigeria's political system has been dominated by men, even though women constitute a larger part of the voting population, with 6.2 million out of 12.2 million newly registered voters ahead of the 2023 elections and almost 50% of the nation's overall population. Across the globe, Nigeria ranks extremely low in gender equality index ratings, and this has been attributed to many causes, including inherent culture, lack of internal party democracy, and the patriarchal practice across the country. Today, we are looking at the impact women will likely play in the forthcoming elections, and we have in the studio a female politician, Mrs. Dorothy Nuhu Akinova. Am I correct with that?
Yes, you are.
She was the presidential aspirant on the platform of the XDP. It's a pleasure to have you join us this morning.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Very interesting conversation. We have taken this with several other women who have been here in the past. And at some point, we just end up with the theory that women simply don't like women. Because if you do, you can completely ignore the male folks and put up somebody and make sure the person arrives at the scene. What has led to this underrepresentation? And frankly, what has happened is that the numbers have continued to go down with every other election. This year particularly, we are seeing less women for Senate, less for the House of Representatives. You're practically frittering away, like you're not replenishing your stock, the inadequate stock, as it were, at the national elections or even the subnational elections. So let me have your perspective on what you think is happening.
Yeah, in your introduction, you did mention patriarchy. That is something we cannot ignore at this point in time. The male value dominated system has continued to get stronger and stronger, and the components of empowerment are way beyond numbers or gender. It also has to do with access to resources, control over resources, and those are the elements that create or broaden, expand, nurture political opportunities. And so, as the few people who have always been in charge continue to amass wealth and get rich, and the rest of the people continue to get impoverished, we will continue to see this lopsidedness, especially because women are the face of poverty in Nigeria and many other parts of Africa. Without consciously and deliberately building women up, especially economically, we will continue to witness this dwindling representation. The other factor is the factor that has to do with interest and self-preservation. The people who are there don't want to leave because the dividends and the privileges that they get when they get there, they don't want to go away without them. And that means that they will do everything that they can to keep the status quo. The challenge now is that women are just coming on board politics. It is extremely difficult in 2 cycles of election to delete what has been the status quo for decades. We never saw a female military governor. It almost looked as if it was a taboo, like it was even prohibited. What is wrong with a female military governor? Administrators. If we had those at that time, we would have had women who were built and who were mentoring other women. If we look at what we have today as democracy, there is lots of recycle of the military component in our democracy. And so when we then see female representation, we have to go back to that history and begin to look at it critically and question what happened there. Because it is from there that we can readdress what is happening to women in our democracy. And we can begin to, create avenues for economic empowerment not microfinancing that enables a woman put grinder in the market to grind tomato. We need more than that if we have to take part equitably in our democracy.
All right, so you made two very important points. That you talked about doing things deliberately and consciously, and then you brought up the issue of mentorship. All right, now these are two things that I want to combine in one fell swoop. Is there a strategic plan now that we see that the numbers of women are dwindling when it comes to running for electoral office and of course participating? Because usually we were talking about this off camera, and when you go to the polling units during elections, majority of the people waiting there to vote are actually women. So it's not a question of not having the numbers. The numbers are actually there. Yeah, and you pointed that out, but you said it's not all about the numbers. So talking about doing things deliberately and consciously, is there a strategic plan to say, okay, fine, let's do this, let's plan this within these so amount of years. We want to be able to mentor certain number of women that can be able to go into these places to replenish these dwindling numbers that we're actually seeing right now. Is that
exactly. There is a lot of effort that is ongoing by the women's movement. I'm part of the women's movement, the feminist movement, and alone I can boast of having mentored over 200 women in the past 5 years.
That's a large number.
Yes. We have consciously designed programs to empower, conscientize women to take part in the democratic process in Nigeria. We have educated, empowered women to join the political parties and begin to occupy important spaces within those structures, because that is where it starts from. But you know, there is lots of work also happening at the policy level. And that is how come we presented the gender appropriation bills. That is part of the strategy. We've been dialoguing with women across the world to see what has worked where and to adapt them to our own setting. And one of those things was to present to the lawmakers gender appropriation bills. Let's begin to have a sense of equity from the policy angle, so that working through it might be easy. And since 1995, after Beijing, we have worked to interpret the provisions that have to do with 35% affirmative action. There seems to be a complicity between the men and the state not to provide an enabling environment for women to thrive politically. It is a deliberate thing. Otherwise, I can't understand how a nation like Nigeria that took the largest delegation to Beijing is unable to meet up with the affirmative action.
When you talk about conspiracy, I feel guilty, like, well, I don't understand in what realms that conspiracy exists, but I'm trying to simplify it to the level of relation. I talk more with my mother than I do with my father. So somehow, I imagine that is what happened for all of us. When you are looking for empathy, for compassion, for a shoulder to lean on, your mother is always there, even without saying it. She reads your emotions. She understands when she needs to come in. Why is it impossible to leverage on this bond? Does the bond cut the moment we arrive at the scene of power? Why have we not been able to transport that emotional attachment, that control you seem to have over your sons, largely? Why is it impossible to leverage on it to begin to ask for this affirmation? I hear you when you talk about self-preservation and all, but that whole conspiracy thing, does it exist in the mind or in the open? And I say this again in the face of some glaring statistics. We studied Bascom. I had nearly 100 people in my class. I had over 70% of them that were women. So it's not for lack of education, clearly. And in the private sector, we've seen women who have held their own, CEOs of bank. I attend WIMB conferences, and I see quite a number of them doing well. Is it a function of being completely disinterested in politics? Or you have not been able to find a way to midwife a transition from that private sector-led success into government? Where does the disconnect exactly remain?
Let me start from going back to patriarchy, how we are socialized. if we have bonding with our sons, it is for the simple purpose of nurturing and preserving patriarchy. We are going to do everything we can to make sure they turn out well. But society has its own models for these male children. There is a role they are going to play, there is a role they are going to fit in, until there is a strong and deliberate effort to deconstruct the way women are trained to train their sons. We will continue to have this trend. That is why a woman would sit, for example, and say the girl child should go to the kitchen and do all the house chores, while the boy is sitting in the parlor playing games with his colleagues in America. You know, it is the way the socialization has wired us. Change that is behavioral takes time to achieve. We have been working on that. It is beginning to manifest. And that's why you have encountered the few successful women that are in the entrepreneurial space. You know, if they are heading banks and all of that, it is as a result of the effort we've made so far. I remember when I was growing up, there was hardly a female bank manager. Hardly. But now there are more of them. What we are busy doing now is drawing intersections across sectors. And that is why, again, women's voices are beginning to amplify. And during the 2023 journey, especially last year, 2022, we saw a lot of capacity building for women who are running for positions. And most of the resources that were used were donated by other women from other sectors. We will see many women in the queues on the election days, but that is the microcredit kind of empowerment result. So the way we have made effort to do those little medium scale empowerment, low scale empowerment, we are calling for more at a higher level, more percentages to be invested in women. Let us do this 35%. What is wrong with it, for goodness sake? I can't understand. So we should be asking the men, when you grow up, what happens to the breast milk you took from us? What does it translate to in terms of understanding of women's leadership? Is it the disconnect that if it is not my mother, then there is no opportunity? If it is not my sister, or my wife, or my daughter, or my mistress, then forget it. It is still the control element if we are confined to thinking that way. Because look at, it's all tokenism.
So, just before Ibrahim comes in, my worry is, if you have the numbers to change the narrative, why wait for affirmation? If you have 52%, plus the likelihood of even influencing your sons to do your bidding, why go and vote for a party that has not approached you with what it wants to do with its women's stock?
Well, this is the purpose for this conversation also, you know, to begin to highlight, and we've had several of these, how women should engage with the electoral process, what their expectations of the electoral process should be. But Rome was not built in a day.
Absolutely.
We are working hard, and the backlash is just as fierce as the gains that we are making. And that is why it seems like we do 2 steps backward when we are doing, 2 steps forward and then
10 steps
many steps backward. It is the problem that is dictating the way things are right now. The backlash is very severe. And it is not only, you know, at the local level, it is global. And that's why, you know, we celebrate the Sustainable Development Goals, because they seek to challenge the conservative posture that many people have towards women's participation by laying emphasis on inclusivity, by laying emphasis, by affirming the documents that came out of Beijing, from Cairo, and from the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. We must begin to look at these issues in an interconnected manner before we can make any progress. And I don't think that when men are, in that high position, they are listening to their mothers as much as they are listening to their wives or controlling their wives. When a woman begins to talk to the man in a way that suggests like she's giving direction, there is a block, suddenly, like she wants to take over, she wants to control, and so thinking that we can make men do our bidding is, I think, an assumption, because it doesn't work like that.
Well, let's look at the political side of the whole situation. I mean, politics is a situation. You talked about a lot of things and actually hindering women participation in politics, and you talked about resources and the rest of it. But one thing I like to talk about is the interests in the first place, because you have to get people to be interested before they actually put themselves up to say, okay, fine, I want to run for this, and I need your support to do this. How is the interest level now, and what are you doing to actually propagate it in women?
The interest was quite high working towards 2023, and that is why I could aspire, for the ticket, to be a president in Nigeria. Like, there were so many of us this time, and it felt really good. But imagine all the things that we went through in our diverse political parties. There is this gesture of giving women free nomination forms, but the amount of resources...
Isn't that a good thing?
It is, but it is not even up to the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of resources that would be expended, even on that nomination form. Because you need to be nominated by one person from every state in this country. And it takes funds to do that. Okay. And what the men have done is to corrupt the system by using money and by using thuggery. And these two things dampen the interest of women. Imagine the Kogi woman who was burnt alive in her house. Imagine the other woman in Kaduna State who was murdered. Those things don't encourage women. They dissipate our interest. And the worst part is that those have happened to a population we are pampering to come into politics. And we can't see any aggressive effort on the part of government to fish out the perpetrators of these heinous acts. How do we expect women to be interested in politics if when they are not even competing for the position, they are just supporting as women leads? They stand the risk of being killed. Then we'll continue to ask women to be interested, but you will see the kind of very dirty politics, the kind of language that is used to describe women. I remember having a dialogue and somebody comparing women in politics with prostitution. I just lost my cool immediately and gave a stern warning, like, I don't want to hear that word again where I am. Because they know that if they equate a woman in politics with sex work, it's driving home to most people the impression that this woman is of low virtue. No woman wants to be described like that. We sincerely do go through a lot. And if we want women representation, which is very crucial to sustainable development, then we have to redefine how we view women who have interest in politics. We have to redefine the pattern in which resources are accessed or distributed. And we have to play the game of equity, because we can't take everybody at par when we have someone who is disadvantaged.
Absolutely. Very strong admonitions there from our guest, Mrs. Dorothy, in the studio. We'll take a quick breather. When we return, I'm sure she has more arsenal to fire at most of us this morning. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to Daybreak right here on Trust TV. The conversation is about women, and of course, it's the political season. Elections are coming, and of course, we are trying to examine the participation of women when it comes to politics. And so, you raise a lot of issues when it comes to the things that are actually going against women, and it doesn't seem like abating anytime soon, even though efforts are actually being made, and you're trying to make some headway when it comes to that. But is it a cultural thing now? Because when you look at it, you talked about how women are actually programmed to raise their children, or to raise their sons into thinking that exactly. So is it a cultural thing now?
Yes, it is. You know, we can, however, try to trace the culture to see where it is all coming from. It is true that, you know, in ancient times, women still performed these roles, but also had responsibilities in economy of the communities, in running the community. There were spaces created for women to make contribution to decision making and leadership at the community level. However, when the colonialism came with religion, and I am carefully calling it religion as against spirituality, because we are talking about institutionalized religion now. It came with its doctrines and a specific kind of culture that defined gender roles, sex roles, and how the genders and sexes interrelate with one another. And since then, we've not been able to draw up something that accommodates women the way women were accommodated within our economic systems and our governance systems before the colonial times.
Interesting, because just falling back on my own memory, especially throughout this democratic journey, I can immediately, you know, I have a mental picture of very strong women that have made it to the top. Role models any day. They are still holding their own across the globe. The Ngozi Okonjo-Iwealas of this, or the Amina of this. We've seen Farida Waziri, for instance, with the EFCC. We have seen women get to this top and delivered leadership that we are all proud of as a people. You would think that for the number of women we have produced, we should be yearning for more. So what is this disconnect between recognizing that this is the way to go? Like you said, we had the largest number at the Berlin conference. We have had women voices, very strong women voices. I mean, Okonjo-Iweala was responsible for most of the biggest reforms we have seen in this country, as in, whether it's in the pension reforms and what have you. If we have seen that amount of success, why is it difficult to say, if we had given this percentage and they had delivered more than expected, we could grow on those numbers? What is it? A system fighting itself to resist these successes, or we are just not interested in the success that had been posted from this quarter?
There is a difference between knowledge and wisdom. We may be knowledgeable in these things, but we may not have the wisdom to translate this knowledge to behavior or to real daily life, you know, practices. Imagine a medical doctor who tells you how dangerous smoking cigarette is to your lungs, but smokes. Knowledge is there, wisdom is lacking. Imagine the education that has gone through HIV prevention. In fact, at a point, we had 75% of awareness amongst youth on HIV and modes of transmission. But using condom, for instance, or abstaining among the same population, or even the perception of risk to HIV, was so abysmally low, between 25 and 30%, against the 75 knowledge level. It means that somehow we always have problems marrying our knowledge with our actions. And there have to be programs put in place, deliberately designed to bring the two together. It requires some expertise, it requires some investment, and so on. Unfortunately, the projects we had like MAMSA that were doing those things those days are no longer there. Our attention is on other things. And until we are able to revisit how we educate, I like one of the candidates was talking and he said, we need to do something about our mindset. And that is it. What is our mindset like? We will continue to talk and talk and talk. For as long as the mindset is like the Budaji mindset, we say, if you give Ngozi space in this place now, some of us, our chairs will be taken away. He may have been joking, but for us, we can see some truth in it because, they are in the Senate, they are getting all those allowances, the security, the glamour, the fame, and everything. They're not going to just encourage me to come and vie for that position and support me and mentor me when they know that when I get it, one of them is leaving. And that's why we asked for complimentary seats, and it was not granted. So, hey, those policymakers up there, what else do you want us to do as women? What?
All right. So we just touched on the gender bills. So actually, we unfortunately we knew how that turned out.
Yeah.
What next now?
Well, we haven't given up. We are representing those bills as soon as the next assemblies are constituted. We will continue to. We've been doing that since the year 2000. Since Obasanjo came into power, we've been doing gender with the Senate and the House of Reps. We have. Even at state levels, we have. Female genital mutilation bills, all of those things. We won't give up. We won't stop. We will continue to work. I trust that with the way things are going this time, the leaders that are going to emerge are going to know that they owe so much to Nigerians that they will do everything or most things right. Not like what we have now where it appears as though nobody really cares about the electorate.
Interesting conversations there with Mrs. Dorothy, a former presidential candidate of the XDP. At this point, I will remember a famous line by a popular Nigerian musician. He said, "We rise by lifting others." Apparently, this word become even more suitable for the female population in Nigeria. It is time for you to harness those numbers, to find common grounds, and to rise by lifting yourselves first of all. And I'm sure the men would naturally just fall in line. Like she had mentioned, they are trained to sustain patriarchy, but I'm sure that if they begin to remind that critical number they train of the role and place of their mothers and sisters in the polity, perhaps we may begin to see changes, even if they don't like it. At this point, this is where we draw the curtain for what has been a very, very interesting conversation, and I'm sure we have brought value, entertainment, and information to your living room free of charge. I want to thank you very much for finding time to be with us this morning.
Thank you.
And you can find us willing allies any day in the fight for the entrenchment of the places of Nigeria.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you have missed out on any of our shows this morning, please look up our social media handle, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and catch up on all what has been a very, very interesting conversation this morning. And please stay tuned for all the other programming that are available to you on Trust Television. I am Sunday Michael Ogu. Let's do this again tomorrow.
All right. If you've had fun being with us today, then let's do it all again tomorrow. I am Ibrahim Yusuf.